right. And with planning season upon us, we know time is super critical. So let's jump into it. And Kelton, if you want to close the poll, that would be great. We got 67% participation, which is fantastic. Thank you all for weighing in. All right. Beyond excited for today's webinar, Beyond the Budget, Strategic Revenue Planning for Charter School Sustainability. My name is Dave Murphy, Chief Revenue Officer here at Charter Impact, and we are joined by two amazing speakers representing both Charter Impact and Leaders Building Leaders. So, why this topic? Why now? Well, as we enter into spring, charter schools should not only focus on preparing for the upcoming state assessments, but also begin the budgeting process for next year. A sound budgeting process helps school leadership plan and manage financial resources efficiently while providing a roadmap for allocating funds to various activities and programs to achieve organizational goals. Organizational goals we know everybody on this call has. A budget also provides schools financial stability as it enables proactive decision making. That's huge and a key piece of what we're going to be talking about today. And risk management. In this webinar today, over the next 56 minutes, you will learn about budgeting best practices from two thought leaders here to effectively allocate resources while building a strong foundation for long-term sustainability. Could not be more excited. And before we dive into some of the content, want to just set some housekeeping rules, ground rules. And if we hop into the next slide here, please use the chat for any questions at all. I'll be monitoring it. We'll stop. We also have time at the end for Q&A, so please do not be shy. Dana and Tom are more than willing to jump in. Number two, this session is being recorded and will be sent after the webinar for you to continue to view at your leisure. Also, upon requests, we've got a ton of slides in here, a ton of great content. They will be available at the conclusion of this session. Just shoot us an email. We'll make sure we get that in your hands. And although this last one, if you are having video and audio issues, this tip, as I'm saying it, doesn't really help, but try to clear your browser cache and rejoin as well. So those are some of the housekeeping items. And before we step into the speaker bios, just a quick note on who we are as an organization. Charter Impact is a nationwide back office provider for finance and operations. So think payroll, student data, business management solutions like accounting, AP, AR, and collectively we support 150 schools currently operating in 9 states across that country. That serves more than 150,000 students. What we're all here in the spirit of helping them achieve greater outcomes. And that also means we manage over $2 billion in revenue of public funding there and also support nonprofits as well. So you can see something in the middle there. Those are our core values. And over the last 16 years we've been in business, they have guided our decision making, and you'll see them throughout this presentation. Grit, adaptability, collaboration, and of course, client centricity. And we are so excited today to walk through this content with you all. All right. So as I introduce the speakers, please don't blush here, Dana and Tom, but really excited for what's to come. So I'll start off with Dana here. With more than 25 years of experience across public, charter, and independent schools, Dana brings a comprehensive understanding of both academic leadership and school operations and finance. She has served as a teacher, charter school principal, independent head of school, and with a strong focus on instructional quality and program development. Dana also brings deep expertise in the business side of education. She has held senior roles, including executive director for district managed charter schools in Miami, Florida, overseeing a portfolio of 8 schools, and CFO of a 7-school network serving 9,000 students and 900 staff. Most recently, she led the Florida Charter Institute Support Unit, providing statewide technical assistance and strengthening financial systems for long-term sustainability. Now, we're lucky to have her here at Charter Impact. She serves as Florida's senior financial leader, and she partners with schools to balance mission and margin. right, through strong financial and operational practices. She holds a degree from Florida International University and Teachers College, Columbia University. So, Dana, thank you so much for bringing your expertise here. And last or second, but certainly not least, we are absolutely honored to have Tom Miller here. Dr. Tom Miller is a nationally recognized charter school leadership expert and founder of Leaders Building Leaders. He played a key role in the expansion of charter schools in North Carolina after the state removed its 100 school cap, helping design the evaluation process that managed more than 300 charter applications and contributed to approving more than 70 schools. In 2014, he founded Leaders Building Leaders, which became one of the largest professional development providers serving charter school boards and executive leaders in North Carolina, specializing in governance training, strategic planning, and executive coaching. Dr. Miller is the author of the 10 Indicators of High Performing Charter Schools and has been recognized as a Global Guru's top 10 leadership expert. There's a lot there because we've got two amazing and accomplished individuals. And without further ado, I want to pass the ball over to them. But we're going to be asking polls throughout this presentation and webinar, really because we want to tailor this content to the audience at hand. So with that, Kelton, if you wouldn't mind launching our next poll here, help us understand where you're at. So what is your biggest financial pressure heading into next year's budget? We'll give you about 15, 20 seconds here. Take a look at the poll. All right. Leader right now is enrollment in state funding is flat or uncertain. We've got some all of the above, kind of chasing in at second place there, and expenses are outpacing revenue. Good news, we have some ideas and topics just for you today. All right, we've got over 60% participation here. Thank you so much. And Dana, absolutely honored. I'll flip it over to you to take us through our official content today.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. As you know, it is spring. It's not only testing season, but it's also time for you to be in the budget process. I emphasize the word process because a budget needs to be fully embedded into the day-to-day of what you do, and it's the driving document. One of my favorite quotes is no money, no mission. So we really want to think strategically about our resources and how we allocate them. I'm going to pass it actually off to Tom because I love your quote.
Yeah, thanks, Dana, and thank you, Dave, too, for that introduction. Hey, Dana, if that's the best part of our webinar, then we're probably in trouble, right? We need to make sure that we own up to that. And I think probably the most important part that's not in our intro is that we have both led schools and failed schools, and failed in a sense of like made wrong decisions or learned the hard way. And so I think this is probably the biggest learning that I see is that a goal without a strategy is just a wish. So if you're setting goals to either, build reserves or to spend, a certain amount of money on your students, but if no one's aware of what the strategy is to make that happen, then it's not going to happen, right? It's just going to be a lot of hope.
Absolutely. And I'm going to piggyback on that. A budget is telling where your money go instead of wondering where it went. So very often in my previous roles, I was a third-party consultant when schools would break their bond covenants. This required a deep dive school visit, attended board meetings, reviews numerous documents. And when I would see these schools really struggling financially, it was really coming down to a lack of oversight or a lack of understanding of those financial documents, or not putting enough value in what the budget is and its purpose and how it should be driving your decisions strategically. Sustainability is not accidental. It has to be intentional and strategically designed. I also sit on a governing board currently, and I try to bring a lot of that lens to the work, and it helps reaffirm how important the budget is in driving our school forward, not only into this upcoming school year, but for 5-10 years beyond. So I'm going to begin with talking about the sustainability ceiling. No matter where you are in the country, I think we're all facing a lot of similar challenges. If seats are full, that's fantastic, but that also means that your revenues are capped. Expenses continue to outpace, and yet we don't often see that increase of revenue when we don't add the seats in a growing position. There's also increased competition. I'm coming from Florida. Not only do we have a large charter market, we also have very strong magnet schools. And most recently, in the past 2 years, we've had a lot of competition with statewide vouchers. So, where charters in the past have enjoyed growth, at least at 5% each year, now we're seeing some of the enrollments dwindling because of the increased competition. There's also an unstable funding environment. Right now, Florida's in legislative session. We wait with bated breath to figure out what legislation will decide. But at the end of the day, we always err on the side of being very conservative because we don't know what outcomes will happen in the 11th hour. And as we all know, costs continue to rise. And unfortunately, costs continue to outpace a lot of our revenues. So we have to be mindful of that. Another really important piece to emphasize is just because you're compliant does not mean you're sustainable. Sometimes when I would meet with governing boards in fragile situations, I said, "Didn't you realize you had a problem?" And they said, "Well, we never had a finding on our audit." And I said, "Well, that's great that you're compliant, but your model is not sustainable, and that there are other key metrics that you definitely need to look at as you're thinking about your budget, even over the course of this year or the continuing 5 years." And then also, it's important to note many schools plateau in year 7 to 8, 7 to 10 in their funding as well. So here we have a ceiling, and hopefully, our presentation will help you come up with some strategies in breaking through that ceiling.
Hey Dana, just kind of thinking about that bulleted list. I know you and I were having a conversation yesterday, and many I would assume many people here don't know this data, but 40% of our charter schools close after year 10, right? So if they're starting to become stable 7 to 10, you start to see those that massive impact on well, how do we evolve? And then the next data point is 55% of charter schools close after year 20. So it doesn't get
Mhm.
any better, after that point. So looking at that list that is on that slide, like that's a really important conversation for boards and the finance committee and the leaders to constantly have conversations around these points.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up because, again, just because you get out of that 5 year mark and have a stable enrollment, what I
Mhm.
tend to find of the schools in 10 or 20 years, when they're struggling, I hear a little bit too often, but we've always done it this way. And a lot of those continuation of those bad habits are inhibiting them to think creatively and innovatively to really break through some of these ceilings. Again, the risk factors are an overdependence on FTE. Again, with unstable funding environments, unstable enrollment, we have to really think thoroughly about how can we diversify our streams of revenue. Over dependence or unrealistic fundraising goals. Also, often I'll see folks cast a budget with $100,000 of a fundraising goal. My next question will be, well, how much did you fundraise last year? And they say $15,000. I said, all right, well, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So how do you intend to bring that
Yeah.
15,000 to 100,000? Another key piece is not multi-year modeling. This really stung a lot of folks after the ESSER cliff, right? If you were not planning out a 5 year projection after the ESSER funding was going to phase out, you'll find yourself in a real bind. And so a lot of schools the past 2 years have had to recover from not multi-year modeling and not anticipating that ESSER risk. And the other piece of it is not having a reserve strategy. And I believe, Tom, later on, you'll talk about this. It's highly important that you set aside reserves, but it's also really important that you know what you're going to do with those reserves.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so ultimately here, Dana, what you're talking about is your margins, right? So, the framework that we're going to use during this session is really thinking about protecting the margin, and that, it starts with knowing what does it actually cost to run your operations of your school, right? Margin is, basically the difference between your hard cost, right, and your total revenue. But we're also going to talk about how can you expand that margin? How can you increase revenue without adding additional students? Because most of you, if you're capped, right, you're just, well, to add more kids, we're going to have to build another part of the building, right? We're going to have to expand our campus. But there are other ways that you can expand your margin, but it definitely starts with really knowing your numbers and understanding where every dollar goes.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So let's jump back um, one more to the margin where we talk about margin. There we go. Oh, pass it again. Somebody's got quick fingers today. So we keep stressing the word margin. Oftentimes, we use these words and instructional leaders are like, well, what do you mean by a margin? We can't forget charter schools are a business and businesses keep a laser-like focus on protecting their margin. Again, no money, no mission. As much as we want to be able to ensure our students have every single resource imaginable, we also have to make sure we have a sustainable model and can afford that. So essentially, margins are the money left over after you're paying for your operations. In schools, the margin is the difference between your revenue minus your expenses. And that margin is going to be your cushion, your financial breathing room. I was working with one particular school. They balanced the budget to zero. They had no margin, they had no contingency built in. And then they realized they were 22 students shy of their enrollment goal. Well, that was close to a $200,000 unanticipated expense, right? Or overage. So we had to figure out how to reduce a significant amount of costs when they didn't hit their enrollment target. Another factor that we have to keep considering is the rising costs, especially in health insurance, right? And so while we're used to usually a 10 to 12% increase, if suddenly it spikes at 15% when we balance the budget, we have no breathing room. So it's really important. My recommendation is to build in at least a 5%. If you have growth plans like adding additional building, you need to be looking closer at almost 10% to really build up those reserves in as much as possible. But it's incredibly dangerous if you work on a budget and do not set aside at least 5%.
Mhm.
Hey, Dina.
Yes.
So right, we definitely don't want a 0% margin, right? Balancing that right to the T. 5% is that pro tip. What do you see kind of best in class schools aiming for in terms of a percent margin?
It depends again on their growth plans, right? So the schools that in 5 years intend to say go to the bond market, look for financing, and build a building, they're looking closer at 15%. There's a lot of other factors that might fold into that we will actually touch on momentarily, because every school is like a snowflake. No two are alike. So, for example, if you have a school that has an incredibly low lease payment or is in a district facility, they'll be able to have a larger margin than the school that's carrying, some debt service. So, it really is a full picture of looking at what is the mission of my school, what do we need to achieve, what are our future plans, and what are the realities that we have to deal with.
Love it. Thanks, Dana.
So again, protecting that margin at all costs and going through the budget process should be using a scalpel, really evaluating and structuring and not slashing your budget with a hacksaw, right? Because we know that we need to protect programming, we need to protect those resources and allocate them in as much as possible to serve students. So you have to be incredibly strategic about the way in which you protect your margin.
Actually, Dana, we've got a timely question here from Andrew. Thanks for jumping in. If you are using money from reserves to balance your budget, does
Mm.
it make sense to have a 5% margin or contingency?
Well, you should never
Right.
use your money from your reserves to balance your budget because then
Mhm.
it's absolutely not a balanced budget. That is not sustainable. If you're constantly drawing on your reserves, you will eventually run out of cash. So that is not recommended to do. You should be able to balance with that 5% margin and figure out how to operate your school within their means.
Yeah. And Dave, going back to your question, well, in two parts, right here, right? The budgeting process really needs to be a 12-month of the year process. You should always be really looking at, your school through the lens of not just a present. So it's always microscopic on the now, telescopic on the future. And so, like I always work with my schools and I say, look, just use this year's dollar amount. Whatever your per
Mhm.
pupil amount is now, let's just start with that. Let's just anticipate that that is going to be next year's also revenue per every student. And then I actually have them build a 90% enrollment and a 95%. And so now you're really looking at multiple different, models because it really forces you to take a hard look at what you're actually spending money on. And when you look at margin, Dana's made some great points, but every department in your organization, I believe, should have a margin. So your marketing department, your fundraising department, like you should know how much it costs to make a dollar, right? You should know how much it costs to recruit a new student. You should know how much it costs to, educate, every student in your school. And if you look at any business, like that's the first thing that they look at is the business healthy? They'll say, how much does it cost to make a dollar? And so, when we just raised at the school I was just in charge of, we were raising millions of dollars a year, but I was always looking at, we may bring in 1 million, but how much did it cost us to bring in 1 million? Like if it costs us 800,000 to make $1 million and our profit margin was only 200,000, like it seems like it's a
Mhm.
big deal, but it's not. So you always need to be looking at each area of your school to ensure that it's profitable.
Love it, Tom. Awesome context. We've got another quick question here, just in terms of definitions. That'll help
Mhm.
set the stage, and then we'll keep cruising on here. This one's from Mike. When you
Yeah.
say the difference between total revenue and total expenses, do you mean operating revenue without prior year ending fund balances, if any, and donations minus operating expenses? I mean, leaving out debt payments.
Yeah, 100%, right, Dana? Right. I mean, it's just your money for that fiscal year, and any money that's not used, you should have a plan for. Dana
Mhm.
already said that, so that money should go into your reserves, and then you're looking at, well, where did we bring in? Maybe we had some grant money or the ESSER funds. Like, I'm not counting on that. I'm not going to count on those types of dollars until I have verified proof. So I'm going to build my budget as though like I have to build those programs or that initiative or that other staff member in my budget using my actual allocated funds. And then once I get the grant or against the verification, guess what it just did? It just increased my margin. So now I have a pool of money on the side that I could be like, well,
Mhm.
okay, hey, we could use, half of this, $50,000 to accelerate something, right? Or to invest in some other part of our school.
Love it. Thanks, Tom. And it looks like we've got some benchmarks coming up, so I'll flip it back over to the team.
Yeah. Hey, is there anything you want to add to that, Dana? I don't know if you kind of feel the same way, but yeah, around that piece.
No, 100%. If
Yeah.
you have an ending fund balance, take it and stash it away. And again, start thinking about what your plans are. So you'll have your 5% plus
Mhm.
that. So you're again building up those revenues in as those savings as much as you can.
Yeah, and if you're a new school, I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is most brand new charter schools, they open with maybe 70 to 75% of their actual projected enrollment. So just
Right.
imagine trying to start your business, 25% in the hole, and you haven't even started yet, right? So this is a an outline from my book. I've got a chapter on fiscal vitality, and this is just a start of a guardrail, right? So these are percentages that you could be looking at, based upon 100% of your total revenue expected for the year, right? And so you'll see I've got a 5% cash reserves it's already built into. I also used to use a different line item, Dana, called contingency, and that was another
Mhm.
3%. So I was almost fooling myself on what the bottom line would be and what my profit margins were. But what Dana said earlier, she had talked about you know what is the most important aspect of your instructional program, right? Is it,
Mhm.
technology? Is it field trips? Is it programs? Like, so like you want to make sure you have, a category for each of those. What I tend to find is that a school that either is under enrolled or has signed a lease agreement or has a mortgage payment that's above 15% of their total revenue, like they're already cutting important stuff, right? So you want to make sure, and this used to be 12, Dana, like now it's with like inflation and construction costs, you're probably looking at 15 to 17% of your overall budget is probably going towards your facilities.
Mhm.
Utilities. And someone will ask me, is like, but what do I include in the utilities? I'm like, look, anything that a hard cost that you have to pay for to keep, the building open. The other one is insurance, right? Which is not even actually listed on here, but that would be another massive line item, right? And that would probably also be, how do I keep the building open? But every dollar that you spend on hard cost is one less dollar that you get to spend on your people. And the most important part of your school success are always the employees, right? And it's always going to be the largest line item. And you have to
Mhm.
decide like how are we going to do this? I've worked with schools where this was actually in the 80%, right? I worked with schools that this is in the 50%. And I say, well, are you getting a great return on investment on
Mhm.
those dollars, or are you forced to only pay 55% because you're paying too much for your overall building?
Absolutely. So, as Tom mentioned, your staffing is your biggest cost. And we have some recommendations that you should audit your staffing annually. The guiding principle is to keep your staffing levels and structures that they align with your enrollment, your program needs, and your financial sustainability. It is crucial to ensure that you're allocating in as much resources in places that are going to impact students as much as possible. Too often, I find budgets too top heavy in administration and then a very lean on their instructional coaching or their teachers. And really, the majority of your money, the bulk of everything, needs to be channeled into your instruction. Looking at also your programmatic needs. If you are performing your fine arts school, you're going to have additional costs staffing those particular areas. If you're a bilingual school or a dual enrollment school, you have to take those considerations as to how my mission also is going to dictate how I allocate my resources. You want to make sure that you have right size staffing ratios, doing comparatives, working with other schools and consortiums and find out how many how many students do you have to a guidance counselor? How many students do you realistically have to a teacher? How many students until you bring in an assistant principal? So you really want to make sure that you streamline your administrative structure as much as possible because again, we want those dollars to go to students. Another area I see that needs some looking at is looking at some of those legacy roles, particularly in those schools where teachers have been around 10, 15 years. Is that really the rate that they should be compensated at? And then also monitoring your overtime trends and especially your substitute usage. That's an area that I find uh, schools tend to break their budgets very early on, especially in the school year, at how often they're using substitutes, where you want to rethink, are there creative ways that we can make sure our teachers are covered when they're out, but also keep some of those costs low? Um, Looking at key metrics like your revenue per employee is also really important. And again, and as much as possible, comparing that to other schools of a comparable size will help inform where your structure lies. Another,
Hey,
yeah, go ahead.
if we can go back to that slide, and there was a question to Teresa Brown asked, can you just go like a little bit deeper, Dana, on the legacy roles? Like what's an example of that?
Sure. I was working with a school and, it's been around for over 20 years and they had like a director of grants and philanthropy. And the person was there for a very long time, but really what their roles and responsibilities were kind of dwindled over the years. So they're still paid at a very high administrator salary, but really not putting forth enough of the workload into what needs to happen to operate the school. So sometimes you'll have these roles that are there because we've always done it that way, and rather rethinking like really what are our needs today and how can we think strategically about making sure we bring on the right team members who can accomplish all the millions of tasks it takes to operate a school, but at the same time be sustainable and fiscally sound.
Yeah. And that's when like we tend to hire like two or three other people, maybe part-time people to really do the job that we've hired the first person to do. But they're still here. And looking at your staff, supervision ratio and like your counselor ratio, best practices is 250 students per every counselor. I've seen lots of schools that have like 500 students per every counselor. Like that's a lot. So really be looking at that. And then supervision ratio, 12 to 1, 15 to 1. Nobody should be supervising more than 15 people. But you start to build out those ratios. So you can have your own, like, whatever your model is, but just say, this is our model, this is our ratio, and this is what we're going to follow. Don't just allow more adults to be hired or not adults to be hired because you think that you can't afford it. Like, you need to really, really, really fight for what you want here in
Mhm.
terms of making sure you get a great return out of all these roles.
Absolutely. So another area to look at is your revenue and program profitability. Tom touched briefly on this. If you're hiring somebody internally or outsourcing that marketing, look at that return on that revenue. If you have somebody full time or outsourcing grant writing, are they bringing in more revenue than they are costing us? Transportation and other program based revenues are also different areas to look at. Am I increasing my return on this investment for this particular role?
Yeah, and so you kind of nailed it with the grant writing. And you may have a grant writer that brings in, $200,000, but is it mission and values based, dollars, right? Is it helping us actually replace to accelerate our program, or is it just a nice, to have on the side? And the transportation one here, Dana, we got lots of charter schools who have school buses, but I always ask, well, how many kids are they picking up? Right? Like,
Mhm.
is it just five kids? Like, the school I was just in charge of, they ran a shuttle that only had eight kids in it every day, and like a counselor drove, and I just like that's a lot. That's 4 hours out of the counselor's day driving nine kids to school when we have 80
Mhm.
in that cohort. Like what's the goal here? Like, I get it. It was a legacy piece that they've done, but it was never re-evaluated once the school grew.
That's such a great example.
Mhm.
So also looking at your schedule and program efficiency. Also, making sure it's mission and margin, that those things are aligned, but also making sure your teachers have a full teaching load, making sure your classrooms are full. I know we have class size compliance regulation, but do you have 8 students in an elective class? And if you have 8 students in an elective class, does it make sense to cast that particular elective? Oftentimes, also folks will say, oh, well, we're going to go from a 7 to an 8 period day. You really have to do a cost analysis to increasing the number of periods in your day. And because that's an additional teacher, that's additional space. So you really have to think through before making those decisions so quickly. Um, Under enrolled electives are definitely an area to take a deep dive. And then also looking at dual enrollment, advanced academics, are those classes full, and does it make sense for the cost of those programs to execute and the number of students taking those classes? You've got to really do an analysis there as well. um, Redundant or non-mission aligned programs, again, every decision you make should be aligned with your mission. So if you are, say, a bilingual school and you want to bring in this large performing arts strand, you have to do a cost benefit analysis of whether or not it makes sense to bring that in if it's not directly aligning to your mission. And then, of course, unfunded services or programs, making sure that you're offering programs that make sense with your mission and are going to be funded from either your operating fund or some grant sources.
And when the question came up about legacy, Teresa Brown, the
Yeah.
last three slides, right? The last three slides were so legacy heavy. And again, going into schools and looking at it, And oh, well, you got these 9 kids in virtual classes. We got this here. And I'm like, well, like why are we saying yes to all that? Let's build a
Hmm.
policy around what it should be. And then if you can build your profit margin, like when I look at dual enrollment, like that's a great profit margin tool because you don't have to pay for like a staff member. So the last school I was in charge of, it was a full dual enrollment school, grades 11, 12. We had 200 kids, right? So that's 200 students receiving full time equivalent, but we only had to pay for their college classes and their
Hmm.
textbooks and a counselor for them. We had a very low counselor to student ratio only because we were able to financially look at a business
Hmm.
model that, worked there.
Another huge piece to do, especially at this time of the year, is look at your third party contracts. Look at every annual contract. Oftentimes, there's escalators baked in that you weren't aware of, or maybe you just don't need those services anymore. Look at your facilities and maintenance, technology, food services, transportation, professional services, instructional services, and insurance. Make sure that you are conducting an annual zero-based review of all of the vendor contracts and evaluate the cost and the value of that contract profitability. Um, Consider outsourcing as well to specialized providers where it improves efficiency and lowers cost. And I'm going to jump to this slide too. A big question to ask is to outsource or not to outsource. It depends on your size, but sometimes it's more cost effective to outsource certain functions than bringing staff in house to do this. One great example is does it make sense to hire a full time IT person in a 500 student school, right? That person is going to cost, X amount of dollars plus fringe and benefits. And does it make sense to have that one singular person, or do you want to outsource that to an expert provider who has a team of folks in between? So there's a lot of questions to ask whether it makes sense to outsource or to bring things in house. But here again is a list of a lot of contracts and different ways that you can rethink outsourcing versus bringing that in house.
Yeah,
Also,
and
even go ahead.
no, no, I was going to say like this is a great slide. So make sure you take a shot of this and really take a look, everybody. Because I've heard, well, it's almost as much as a staff person. Well, you're not even including like employee taxes and insurance and all those other pieces. So if they're effective, like think big, but start small, right? How could we start to
Mm.
build this? And then how could we get them in year 2 or 3 to start to train someone maybe at our school, to do these pieces? So this is a really great, important piece. And you don't want to be cheap in some of these areas. You don't want to be cheap with your human resources and your lawyers, right? Make sure they're really good at what they do because they'll actually save you money if they do. But this is a great slide of content that you put together, Dana and team.
And I'm glad you pointed that out because it's not always dollars to dollars. Because also, what if your payroll person is on vacation, right?
Mhm.
Somebody still has to process payroll. If you are doing those things in house and not outsourcing, you've got to make sure that that gap is filled. So somebody's got to give up spring break to run payroll. Or another area to look at as far as outsourcing creatively and innovatively, I find people hiring substitutes, like a specialized vendor that finds
Mm.
substitutes. Whereas you could also look at, does it make sense to bring that in-house or maybe partner with a local university utilizing some of those students? So that's actually an example where doing it in-house, you can find quite a bit of cost savings and maybe even build up your teacher pipeline. But there's no one size fits all. You've got to really analyze the team and the talent that you have, what your needs are, what providers are available, and really what gaps you might have if you outsource or gaps you might have if you do things in house. But it's definitely something to take a deep dive look at.
Love it. And before we shift completely from kind of contracts and outsourcing, Tom, I think you've got some fun stories or background. What's the most wild third party contract you've uncovered with one of your?
This is what a great question. Wasn't even set up. It was a living wall, Dave. It was a living wall. I had to take over a school that had about a $500,000 immediate deficit. So I started to contact every vendor, find out what they did. Was there a way we could maybe, slow down the services or have it less? And one was a $10,000 a year, uh, contract to keep a wall alive. And so it was all these plants in a wall. And I said, well, what am I paying for? They said, well, someone comes out and waters them. I said, well, I'll just do that. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. I said, okay, well, you're going to have to take your plants because I can't afford $1,000 a month to keep this living wall alive. So that's just one of many. Yep.
Yeah, and those things add up. For example, I was looking over a school's transactional details, and I see every month that they were paying for like a digital fax subscription.
Mm,
And I'm like, well, when was the last time you faxed anything? And like, well, we don't use it anymore. I'm like, all right, well, we just wasted $715
right.
last year because you were paying for a digital fax subscription that's not even used. So
Yeah.
those little
Subscriptions,
things add
phones. Oh
up.
gosh, they
Yeah,
really do. They really do.
definitely.
Yeah.
And the last that I'll talk about with protecting the margin is really, do you have a cash and liquidity strategy, right? I always encourage boards, even if you don't have a bond, look at your days cash on hand. It's such a hard, concrete number to monitor month after month. And it really tells you not only if, funding was to stop, how long can we stay alive, but it also is a good hard, fast key performance metric where you can see how your liquidity is, right? What are your targets for reserve? Again, that's going to be contingent on what a lot of your plans are. And, do you have enough cash reserves and liquidity that if you have some major emergency you did not anticipate? I'm in Florida. We have hurricanes, unfortunately. And when you least expect it, you suddenly have, a $50,000 bill to do landscaping cleanup. Do you have money in your cash reserves to cover that? And then understanding the pros and cons of line of credit. Sometimes banks will offer lines of credit. That sounds great, but also don't over borrow. And then again, those contingency triggers. What will trigger you to dip into your reserves or your contingency? And circling back to that gentleman's first question, like, should I use my reserves to balance the budget? The answer is absolutely not. But there might be legitimate reasons to tap into your reserve, right? If there's some unanticipated expense, like in maintenance of property or something has happened, right? There should be certain reasons, but you as a board really need to determine and decide what will trigger this so that you don't just dip into the reserves all of the time to make sure you can get by.
Yeah. And that's also like that's why you should have like a tech plan and a facilities repair plan. Like all those things should be in place, and you should know like when you've got your reserves, what will this cost if all the HVAC units went out or all these things went out, or if you bought a ton of Chromebooks over like COVID times, right? You're probably replacing them all. So now you have a problem, right? So you got to be having a plan each year and build it into your budget first. And then if there's an unexpected cost, right, that's the only time to which you ever have to dive into your reserves.
You're so spot on. And one thing I just did at the school where I'm on the governing board, we did a full facilities assessment. These are so worth it, right?
Mhm.
Have a consultant come out, look at every aspect of the building. They're going to give you a schedule of, when your HVAC units might go out, when you can anticipate your roof, your whiteboards, every piece of your school, they're going to put together a schedule and a timeline when you can anticipate the need to replace that, and they'll put the projected cost. That is such a tremendous asset when you're looking at multi-year forecasting because now you can anticipate those expenses. Is this something I have to dip into my reserves? Well, if it's an HVAC, chiller plant replacement, you might have to, and that is, a viable reason to dip into your reserves. But you've got to have that plan, and the more information you can have in those assessments, the better you can really plan out.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hate talking about slashing costs. So I'm going to pass this off to Tom because I'd so much rather talk about expanding the margin and ways that we can increase our revenue so we don't have to constantly look at downsizing things.
Yeah, and this is where it's important that you have this is what I'll tell my teams. Like, look, for the next 20 minutes, we're just going to brainstorm of how we could. We're not going to worry about what we can or we don't, we can't do this. Like, we're just going to say almost like a yes and mode. So it's really important, especially if your seats are full, and we're all kind of if you're in the charter school sector right now, 30 years ago, you were the disruptor. Well, now you're being disrupted
Yeah.
because we've got all these other options, right? So you need to really be looking at how could you be more creative. The first piece I would just look at is your systems, right? You know, most schools leave 3 to 5% of the revenue on the table, and it's not because they're careless, it's because their systems aren't optimized, and there's not multiple people really taking a look. Um, a, a recent school that I had, like, we realized that some of our dual enrollment high school kids were not fully enrolled in like the Florida system. So therefore, we weren't getting any money for them because their classes weren't coded correctly. Or you need to know exactly how is the state going to fund me for, if like I was in North Carolina and you got local dollars and you got state dollars. You had separate billing for every student. Like who's really overseeing that? Because one
Mhm.
student, may be costing you $300 to $500 a month that you're not, bringing in. And if you say $300 to $500 isn't a lot of money, well, that's probably your like electric bill, per month, right? Or
Mhm.
that's a couple substitutes, per month. So there's ways you need to be making sure that you got great internal controls and checks and balances, around those pieces. Another way is to stack your grants, right? So if you're writing grants, I always had all my teachers write as many grants as they wanted to, and then I would actually give them like a stipend, even if they didn't get it. I didn't care that they didn't get it. It was bringing ideas, but we would always have, someone be, looking, how do we stack a grant on top of each other, right? So we would get like maybe one, major grant, but then we could write a bunch of grants off of top of it. Or we'd say, hey, we're going to invest $300,000 into a STEM program. If we could, if we could find a grant to cover half of the funds, but keep 300,000 in our budget no matter what, now I can use that other 150,000 to put towards my reserves or to pay down debt or something to that
Mhm.
effect. So you're looking for ways where you're going to expand your program anyway, and you're going to build the grants like right into your revenue pieces. Major donor gifts and donor programs, like I highly recommend that every charter school board go recruit someone who's actually raised millions of dollars. That's what you want. You want someone who has that experience so they could help, mentor and oversee and support. Don't just try to go into say, hey, we're going to raise a 500,000 this year. Like, who's going to raise a 500,000? Like, it's not bake sale money. Like, this is real cash. But the school that I was just in charge of every year, they were raising $1 million through major gifts, but it was very intentional, a lot of sponsorship
Mhm.
programs. So, you're all doing incredible things in your buildings. Other people need to know about it and industries need to know about it. There's lots of businesses out there that want to help your school be successful. Here's a secret. They don't know how because you haven't told them what you're doing and how they can be a bigger part because you're creating the workforce for the future generations, right? So take the time and look at some of your most successful programs and then go find industries that need those types of graduates and talk to them about, hey, how could we partner all together? Um, and then I just saw someone was telling me, Dana, is it California is going to move to like an attendance rate to like note their like per pupil? Oh my gosh. Like,
They already do ADA.
oh my
So
goodness.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's another piece. Really learning how every dollar is generated. North Carolina has moved from a best 1 to 2 to now it's like you're being paid on last year's number, and then you have to prove that this year's number is better before they do. So some years it might be good if you're over enrolled, and some years it could be really bad. So knowing how your money comes in is so critically important, and ensure that you have internal controls and systems around all of those pieces.
Right. I want to circle back to the grants as well,
Mhm.
thinking really strategically about your buckets of money and your restricted funds. I'll give an example. I was working with a school that was receiving about $50,000 in Title IV, which could be used for professional development and some other things. They chose to use it to purchase a bunch of interactive whiteboards, which is an allowable expense, and that's fine. But the same school also gets close to 700,000 annually in capital outlay, but they only had a low lease payment. So they had leftover restricted funds in capital outlay that they could have used to pay for the smart boards, but then instead their teachers, were kind of deprived about $50,000 of professional development because the capital outlay funds should have been utilized to pay for the whiteboards. So really having a clear understanding of those restricted funds and where you can, like you said, you know, lean off of that operating budget as much as possible and using your grants to really maximize your goals in the school. And that's really going to get you the greatest return on what you want to do.
Yeah. And Dana, you just, you walked our construction project, right, in Walton County,
Yeah.
and we were able to build the first fully functional college facility in Walton County. The first $11 million towards that came from general appropriations because members of our board would go to Tallahassee and they would have a conversation how this is not just a school project. We are building a college facility for our dual enrollment, anybody else's dual enrollment, and traditional college students. So what could you be doing on your campus that could really not just help your school, but help the community and go to your local county commissioners, go to your local representatives and see, because there is funding available for you to help with your capital
Mhm.
expenses.
Absolutely. Build those community partnerships.
Mhm. Yeah, so how do you monetize your assets, right? You already have a building. Is there other ways to generate revenue, from that? You could rent it, right? Obviously. But you definitely, if you rent it, you want to make sure that you've got the insurance coverage and someone is actually overseeing that. You have your expertise, right? So, one thing we were looking at, is how could we, because we had a massive wait list, right? So how could we engage our wait list? Could we do tutoring programs? Could we do clubs? Could we do things outside or during the school day that could, generate additional revenue for our school through the talented teachers we have, and then we could help supplement their, salary pieces. Branding. If you just watched the World Baseball Classic, everybody's jersey had like 9 different logos on it. Did it not? Not just the United States, but there was something on their helmet, right? But each one of your students, I mean, if you think about it, they are branding your school in the community, all right? So the crest that they wear, the colors that they wear, but really think about like how could we utilize our brand to impact? So if you go all the way back, and if you're old like me, and maybe you watched the Bad News Bears, right? On the back of the shirt, they had like the bail bonds, right? So, maybe there's like some sponsors for your athletic programs that could help, with the uniforms. Right? There's lots of different ways that your brand can also generate revenue. Um, and my question to you is, are you leveraging them, right? Are you leveraging that, opportunity? Location wise, if you are a school in a rural community that is really struggling maybe with your enrollment, when's the last time you hosted a community event on your campus? There's lots of organizations that need a larger space. So my wife used to work for the health department in Brunswick County in North Carolina. So every year she would host the health fair at our school. She would also do all of the car seat checks, right? So we found ways to impact the community, right? Which also advertised our school to all these families who didn't know who we were. But we also made a big impact because we expanded our strategic partnership, right? So what could you do, right, with your larger building, right? Do you have an auditorium? Do you have a space and a place that could generate revenue? Now, it might not be cash on hand, Dana, right? But it could be to bring in additional students. It could be
Mhm.
to bring in like additional partners. Are you going to local chamber meetings and notary meetings? Are you letting people know about your charter school and what you do? If not, like that's an easy per month. And I guarantee if you do it over 12 months, you're going to build relationships that's going to bring in additional revenue to your school.
Love it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Tom, Dana, quick time check. We've got about 4 minutes left,
Yep.
decent amount of content. We've got at least one question bubbling up here, so just want to keep us on pace.
Yeah, and these slides I think we've got here, Dana, they're pretty, similar to what we just talked about, right? But I do let's talk about the philanthropic infrastructure one. Can we go to that one for sure? Because I think I hit most of these. But
But
so, oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm going to actually piggyback. I'm going to emphasize on the the summer and after school programs. I
Yeah.
used to work with a school that brought in close to $1 million a year annually of just their after school programs, their summer school programs, and their private pre-K program. And this is unrestricted funds. The kids were served well. parents need an after school solution, many of them. So it was a win-win for everyone, and especially for the school site, and especially for the kids, because now they have all this exposure to enrichment, and it helps drive up revenue. Okay, now we can go to philanthropic.
Yeah, and this is just really making sure you have a strategic plan around your major donation. So each month you should be talking to your donors in any capacity, whether it's to send them a card, send them a message, or to call them to let them know the exciting things that their dollars have done on your campus over the last 30 days or 45 days or 90 days. But so really get strategic here about how you can, bring in additional funds. That donor calendar, Dana, is so important to be thinking about who are all of the people, even if they haven't donated money yet, maybe they donated time. How am I keeping them engaged month after month? Not just the same email newsletter that everybody gets, right? What else could you do? Could you send them testimonial videos from some students? Could you send them like a signed picture of like the actual students or like a card written by the students, right? So really think outside this. But number five is maybe the most important. We led a training last year. Dan, it was really great. Brought in some major uh, um, fundraisers and donors, and we talked about what does it take to get $1 million donation. You have to get your facility ready, right? You need to be really thinking about are we $1 million donation school, and what would that look like, right? Because anybody who's going to donate money to you, they're not donating to your debt. Okay,
No.
they don't want to pay off your debt. They want to create impact and legacy. So how are you ensuring that you're an organization worthy of $1 million donation, that you're going to protect their donation and protect their legacy, all those pieces? So this is why I say it's really important to have someone on your board who's been part of a major, donation program. For sure. And then this last one, know what's around you. Like there's so much competition now, right? Districts are getting better through the expansion. They have their own remote academies. There's demographic, shifts and housing trends, and there's so many changes. Like you, as the CEO of your charter school, your CFO from your finances, and your CEO head of school, you need to be really understanding what's coming down the pipe because Dana said have a 3 or 5 year financial plan. This has to be part of that plan, right? What's
Mhm.
coming in, what's changing legislative wise, how can we leverage it, right? And how can we protect our overall schools viability, right? For long term.
Love it. We're going to do a 10-second poll here to bring us home so we can, make sure that folks get what they need. Um, Kelton, if you want to share that up there, curious, one last question before we kind of bring this thing home. After today, what is the one thing your school most needs to move forward financially? Oh, yep, they're coming in here. Revenue diversity, multi-year budget. Okay. The revenue diversity continues to climb. Tom might have gotten them on this section here with expansion, right? A lot more fun to talk about than shrinking the margin or increasing the margin through shrinking costs. Love it. All right. So thank you. And more revenue diversity beyond per pupil funding takes it home with 50% of the 32 votes. All right. Um, would love to bring us home here, Dana and Tom. And we can stay after for folks that want to stay for some Q&A as well. But yeah, a couple more slides.
Yeah.
Tom, you're the board guru, so I'm going to pass this one to you.
Yeah, so just as much as the purpose of school is learning, right? And it's unfortunate that if you look at most board meeting minutes, there's not a lot of heavy conversation about whether students are learning or not, right? And so, your board and you should be really always looking ahead, right? If your school is more than 5 years old, more than half your board meetings should be focused on the future. So these are some really great questions that the team came up with. If your enrollment drops 5% next year, like what's the impact? I mean, for some schools, that's 75 to 125,000, dollars. Could you afford that? What would that look like? And you can't just say, well, we have reserves, right? Because that is not going to solve the problem for more than one year. If
Mhm.
if the per pupil fund drops, what happens to us? What do we cut first? And what, Dana and I, and I know what gets cut first. It's professional development.
I know.
It's all those like supplemental programs that really make your school great. So how do you protect them, right? Through generating revenue right through them or having a reserve to make sure you don't ever lose any of those programs. And what else could you be looking at? So I do think that your finance director needs to be a CFO in a sense, and you need to make sure you're going to your state level finance questions or like your finance meetings, and then in addition to be paying attention to what's happening in the budget pieces. Because I don't think North Carolina ever approved their budget this past year, Dana. Like off the top of my head, I feel like, and we got a bunch of North Carolina folks in there, so I feel like they're still working off of 2024 numbers. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, thank you, Brenda. Yeah, I knew it. Like I saw them, and I was like, I heard that the other day. I was like, how's that possible?
Wow. Yeah. And I thought Florida was bad. I think we
Mhm.
finally approved our budget in like late August.
Mhm.
So one of the points we just really want to drill home is oversight is compliance strategy equals sustainability. They are two different things. Oftentimes, governing boards are really focused on the oversight, which is absolutely important, but they've got to spend time talking about the strategy. So definitely important to make that differentiation. And the final takeaway, Tom, take us home.
Yeah, well, before I do, hey Angela, you asked a question. I'm so sorry I missed it.
Oh,
Medicaid billing, you can be reimbursed, right? So you really want to get with someone who knows and understands that really well, but you can be reimbursed for speech services and therapy services that your students are doing. And maybe Dana knows more, and you could reach out to her about that. But there's lots of aspects of your school that can be reimbursed for sure. You just need to know what they are. Yeah, I mean, so I think we started at the beginning, right? A goal without strategy, right, is just a wish. And if you're not really taking the time to design, right, to create uh, and design a long-term sustainable organization, you are going to eventually be hit with a significant impact, right? So sustainability is not accidental, it's intentional, and it is designed, right? It's not by default. And I just love the Dave Ramsey piece. I think he says something like kids do what they want, adults follow a plan. And you need to make sure there is a plan for every dollar that comes in your school and every dollar that's in all of your bank accounts. What is the
mm,
purpose of those dollars? Why are they being saved? And what will you use them for over the next 3 to 5 years? If it's beyond that point, then there's just really no point in saving money, Dana, when your school closes.
absolutely.
Love it. Well, what a great final point to end on. And before we jump into questions, Tom, Dana, thank you so much for your time today, sharing your insights on mastering the budget, right? Mastering the margin and expanding the margin going forward. So we've got a couple extra minutes here. We're happy to stay on and answer any questions that come through the chat. Also, if you would like to schedule an appointment to discuss any of these topics further, learn more about either of these organizations, Leaders Building Leaders and Charter Impact, please just feel free to take a picture of the QR code on the screen, and we'd be happy to connect with you to explore any of these topics further and talk about what your goals are financially. It will bring you right to a calendar, I believe, for easy scheduling. So let's see what we've got in the chat here. All right, and Tom, I think you're just responding to the hosts and the panelists, so you might need to flip to everybody on that as well. Um, Excellent. Any questions, folks? We've still got 42 in here, so I think everybody's curious if anybody's got some questions to tap into the mind share here of Tom and Dana.
There's a question that I just saw it on the backside. It says, I'm a charter school not open yet. When would a facility assessment be done? Well, if you haven't opened yet, I would have one done now. If you have your facility, make sure you know exactly what it takes to get their certificate of occupancy and
Mhm.
maintain it. I think that would be a good start to that process for sure. Dana, what else do you think?
Yep. Whenever you have your facility is the time to do it,
Yeah,
because it
yeah,
will definitely help you whether you're in year one or year 20.
yeah. And year zero, because it may make you
Right.
decide not to sign the lease. So I wouldn't sign any lease until I've had that done for sure.
That's a great tip right there, particularly starting up.
Mhm.
We've got one from Tammy in the chat here. Thanks, Tammy. How often should wages and job descriptions be evaluated?
Every single year,
Yeah.
every year. Absolutely.
And the job description, I'm going to say every month
Oh,
because
okay.
here's what we find. We get hired for a role, right? And then because we're, charter schools and we're so good at saying yes to things, we end up taking on all these other roles and we actually don't do our job, right? Because we're so overwhelmed with, trying to grab the slack from everybody or from all these other things. So your job as the head of the school should be making sure that everybody understands their key result areas
Hmm.
and that they're spending time with it. And most importantly, the other piece that we see in charter schools is someone will, it's called the Peter principle, everybody. Everybody's going to get promoted into incompetence at some point of their life. And what happens is someone is a great volunteer, then they're the front office manager, and next thing you know, they're the finance director. And they really don't have a lot of experience, but they're competent and they'll show up to work and are dedicated, but they may not have the experience that they need to be a true CFO. So make sure
Hmm.
everybody's being trained for their job, all right, and equipped to do their job and has feedback and coaching. And that's why I talked about that supervision ratio, so important, 12 to 1, 15 to 1, because everybody deserves feedback in their job,
Hmm.
especially if we got board members here. Feedback from the board to the head of school, like how well are they doing? Because the charter school turnover, it's just out of control with, heads of schools. It's every 3 years is the average time that most leaders spend in that spot. And I just find that schools start to drift away when they're every 2 or 3 years they're replacing administration.
Excellent. Um, Fidel would like you, Tom, with with the fundraising board member to see a list of names.
Yeah,
Fidel,
man.
I'm pretty sure we've got them guaranteed, ready to go. List of about 100 for you.
I
Of
would
course.
guarantee in your neighborhood though, Dave, right? There are neighborhood millionaires everywhere, right?
Hmm.
Why I would be looking at, individuals who you can actually look up. This is what I learned from that guy. You can actually look up in a database and see like where people are donating major amounts of money. I don't know the exact link, but you can research that, and you can research in your community who's very philanthropic. And I would always just go to any meeting and say, who do you all know that I should know? Here's my school. Here's our mission. Here's what we're looking to accomplish. I need land. I need money. I need talent. I need time. Like I'm going to stand here and every month I'm going to do it. And someone's going to come to you. The universe loves when you throw out what you need.
But you also have to be in a place with your school where you are bleeding your mission, that you've got a strong financial position, and that you have all of the stakeholders that are involved are over the moon about the programming. If
Hmm.
not, donors don't want to invest in something they don't believe in, something they don't see as sustainable, and they definitely don't want to donate just to pay off your operating expenses. So you have
Yes.
to be strategically positioned even before going out to market to look for those fundraisers.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the last school I was in charge of, we really ramped up our STEM and our AI programming and our underwater drones and ROVs, right? And then we went out and we went to start to go find those people, and we would invite them to the campus when we'd have these, careers on campus days, and they loved it, right? And they want to see that their dollars are going to something worthwhile,
Yeah.
and that they're also being spread out too. That's another big piece. Donors love to know that everybody's going to somehow, benefit from that.
Love it. And so we're 11 past at this point. We've still got a great group here, but figured we could end on a really practical piece of advice. So we've got a comment here in the chats around
Mhm.
um, doing more with less, right? And I think being financially savvy, having that strategy can help you achieve that, right? And we want to be building that playbook and thinking years in advance. But Tom, Dana, if you had to give like kind of one piece of advice for a quick win, the first thing that comes to mind if an executive director comes to you and say, "Hey, I need to do more with less right now," what's the easiest kind of quick win thing that comes to mind to explore?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would ask is who else is doing it? Right? Because I want to know who has
Mm.
also had success with this same
Mm.
type of task because I don't want to spend a lot of time learning how to do it. I want to see how successful people have already done it. So that might be the first thing I would do, Dave, is I would go visit. I love visiting high performing schools and I went to High Point University, everybody. Like if you want to see an organization that's amazingly and full of like abundance, go to High Point. I mean, so that's what I would do. I'd go see where success is, and then I would see if they would mentor me, and then I would bring that strategy back.
Love.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not very original in my answers, but I could not agree more with Tom. The more that you talk to peers, the more that you build out your network, particularly the schools who are independently operated, don't have a management company to lean on, but building your network of great thinkers. The top tier leaders I've ever met in my life, they ask a million questions. They want to know how Tom did it. They want to know how Willie did it. They want to know how Jeanette did it. And they learn from each other because there is no magic wand and you've got to figure it out, but to figure it out alone is moot, right? Really leaning on and building out a network and sharing some creative ideas can help you get to where you need to be.
Love it. Pieces of advice. The thing that jumps out to me from the presentation here is take a look, especially if you've been in an operation for several years at this point, go back, take a look at those 30 third-party contracts and find your living wall
Yeah.
to grab dollars back into the budget. A nice quick win. And just again, for everyone in attendance, thank you so much for joining us here today. Feel free to reach out with any other questions or if you just want to say hi. Dana, Tom, your insight is invaluable. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And keep an eye out, folks, for the next one we put on here. Have an awesome day.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.